Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole with another video. Hope you enjoy the video today. Please subscribe to the channel. Any comments, thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again with another video. This time it is chainsaw sharpening for dummies, because there's a lot of things that if you're a beginner that you are totally unaware of. Even if I go back 45 years ago when I got my first chainsaw secondhand, I used to use it for camping. And I think I used it for about 6 months off and on, so I didn't hardly ever use it, but it went blunt and I really didn't know how to sharpen it or what to use. I didn't even know that you had to use a file. So I could imagine if someone's got a chainsaw and they've been using the file and they want to step up to a grinder and they see all these angles on there and they hear about it, and it can be really confusing. So hopefully I can put that all away and make it easier for you. So we'll go over some of the settings, or all of the settings that are on a grinder and what they're used for, and I'll try to make it as simple as possible without getting too technical. And I'll give you the generic settings that will be good enough for 95% of your cutting. We won't get into milling or anything exotic or using special racing chains or carbide chains. We'll talk generally about semi-chisel and a little bit about full chisel, the difference between the two chains and the difference in sharpening them. It's almost identical with just a few little points here and there. So first of all, if we talk about the top plate angle, for those that are not familiar, the top plate angle is the angle on the top of the tooth. You can see this angle here. This is referred to the top plate angle. The top plate cutting angle is the beveled edge that you see on here. So this is called the top plate cutting angle. So this is just the angle being top plate, which is roughly set at 30 degrees in most cases. And the top plate cutting angle is normally set at 60 degrees. So the grinding wheel comes in on an angle on that. If you're using a file, the radius of the file sits in here, and it creates a 60-degree angle approximately if the file's sitting about 20% above the top of the tooth. So let's have a look at the top plate angle settings, which we'll just get this lever out of the way. So if we go down here, this adjustment here is for your top plate cutting angle, and you'll see that it goes from 0 degrees in the middle and 35 degrees to the left and 35 degrees to the right. So in a normal type chain, which is a semi-chisel, you'll use 30 degrees left and right. So that's the normal setting. 30 degrees covers between, say, softwood, medium wood, and hardwood. It's pretty generic. It's quite good. If you really work in a lot of hardwood, then 25 degrees would be a better setting if you're constantly cutting hardwood. If you're constantly cutting softwood, 35 degrees would be a good choice, but it would have to be really soft wood. So this is why the 30 degrees is the best all-rounder. It covers everything. Now, the other thing is, if you do go to the 35 degrees, which is more aggressive, the more aggressive that you go, the more sharpening will be required. So if you was to stick at 25 degrees, you would sharpen less, but it won't cut as good. So that's the trade-off. So if you stick to 30 degrees, left or right, you won't have an issue, and that's the generic setting, and you'll find out that you will have good cutting performance, because that's what it's all about, sharpening the chain and getting good cutting performance. So the next thing, if we talk about the semi-chisel has a nice curved radius, and we'll just have a look at that. The semi-chisel has this nice curved radius on the top of the tooth there. So this is referred to the working corner because it's the very point of the tooth. So this is referred to the working corner. And because it's got a fair amount, a couple of millimeters or a little bit there, 2 millimeters or something like that, right on that corner, it has to blunten that corner before the performance drops off. But when we've got a full chisel, it comes to a sharp point. So it gets blunter a lot quicker. It cuts more aggressive, but it gets blunter quicker. Full chisel, I prefer full chisel. Full chisel works fantastic in softwood. It just eats through it. It will work in hardwood. Depends on how hard it is. If it's very, very hard, I'd prefer to use semi-chisel. But if it's only just hitting the hard side, I would use full chisel, as I do in most cases, and I grind at 25 degrees on the top plate. So that's the top plate. So that's what that's for. So just bear that in mind, the top plate. So the next thing we'll talk about, and we'll zoom back out there, is that you'll see that the head here can actually move. So this head moves. There's a scale on the back here, and it goes from 90 degrees to 40 degrees. And if we have a look right round the back, and we'll come around this side, it's better. There's another scale on the back, so let's see whether you can see that scale. A little bit difficult to see. I think you can just see it now. It goes from 90 degrees here right down to 40 degrees there. So you've got that knob at the back, and you can adjust that. But if you look at the front, you can actually see, we'll zoom right in there, you'll see that it's set at 60 degrees, which is the most common setting. Now, this type of grinder does everything that a professional grinder will do. So you have got this angle here, and before we were talking about the top plate cutting angle. So this is the top plate cutting angle that I was referring to, and it comes in on here, as I said, on the beveled face of the top plate. So that's the top plate cutting angle, comes in at 60 degrees. If you want to adjust it, if you had softer timber, you could put it on between 50, 55 degrees, anywhere between 50 and 60. 60 is the most common. So if you put it on 50, again, it's more aggressive. It'll go blunter quicker. So set it on 60. 60 is the standard. You can experiment if you want. It's not going to be a major hassle if you do, but I'm just giving you the standard settings. So the next thing is on full chisel chains, we have what they call tilt, where you tilt the vise. The whole idea of tilting the vise is it will put a off-center grind. Normally the grinding wheel will grind the chain. It'll sit in the middle of the tooth, and it will grind right in the middle. When you go offset grinding, it gives a slightly different profile on the gullet. And what actually happens is that down the bottom here and on the side, on the bottom here and on the side, you get a slightly different angle or a slightly different grind, an offset grind, and that actually helps. It changes what we call the hook. So this little C shape that you can see on a full chisel, if you don't have the 10 degrees downward tilt, sometimes this little hook can look a little bit like a bit of a parrot's beak and can get a little bit too pointy. And if it gets a bit too pointy, especially in really hard wood, it can even bend slightly. So not all chain manufacturers recommend 10 degrees downward tilt, but 10 degrees downward tilt will certainly give you less hook, and it can't do any... Well, I personally think that your chain will benefit from 10 degrees downward tilt rather than no tilt. So I'd prefer to use it. It's not a game changer, but it's certainly, there is benefit from using that. Now, the next thing, the chain that I've got in here is a standard 3/8 chain. Now, on a standard 3/8 chain, you have to look at your grinding wheel. So your grinding wheel, if you buy a grinder like this, and we'll go into that detail in a minute, it came with 3 wheels. A 3.2 millimeter wheel, which is what's in here. That's for your 3/8 low profile and your 1/4 inch. and then you go to a 4.7 millimeter wheel, the width, not the diameter. The diameter is roughly about 145 millimeter, so it's 145 millimeter, 22.2 millimeter diameter arbor, and then the width of the wheel in three sizes. So 3.2, 4.7, and 4.7 is for 0.325 chain, 3/8 standard chain, and 404 chains. There is a 6 millimeter wheel that it came with, and that's used to dress the rakers if you want to do it that way. So let's talk about the controls. So first of all, when we move the head or the motor or the grinding wheel, we can change the angle of that grinding wheel. And as I said before, 60 degrees is the standard setting. The next control is the top plate angle, which we discussed that before. So this was the top plate angle here. So as we said, it's minus 35 to the left, 0 in the middle, and we go to the right side, which is call it positive 35 or just 35 degrees. So that's that one. Now the tilt angle, if you loosen this knob here, you can push the vise to the left or forwards or backwards. Now for those that are not too familiar, we'll just tell you one thing, that if you're going to do the left-handed tooth, which is the tooth furthest away from you, you will pull the vise towards you so that the tooth tips over. If you're going to do the right-hand side tooth, which is the tooth closest to you, the operator, you will push this knob at the bottom. There's a knob at the bottom here. You'll push that away and the vise will tilt towards you. So you probably, let's see if you can just see that knob. We'll just see whether we can get down there and you can see that. So there's a little adjustment knob with a spring on it. And if we get in closer, we'll just see whether you can see that tilting mechanism. So this is the left-hand tooth. You always view the tooth from the back. I'm viewing it from the front. So if we were to view from the back the correct way, this is the left-hand tooth on this side, and this is a right-hand tooth this way. So if we were going to adjust or grind the right-hand tooth, which is this way, we would push that knob away from us, and you can see that the vise and the tooth tilts towards you. And if we do the left and pull that towards us, it tilts the other way. So that's the tilt. As I said, it is up to you whether you want to use that or not. On a full chisel, you can't do any harm by using it. I recommend that you do use it, but that's up to you. Okay, so we've covered that. The next control that we can use is our backstop. So this is the backstop here. All as this does is the tooth sits behind there, and we can move this into the wheel or away from the wheel. So you just want it so that it just touches the wheel. That's how you set it up. You set it up using this black knob here. So as we turn it clockwise, it moves forwards. Anti-clockwise will move backwards. When we've got it in the right position, we can lock it with this lock nut. So that's the way that that works. Now, you've got another knob here. Now, this knob on the side here is that the backstop can move further away from you, which towards the left-hand side, or it can come towards the right-hand side. So what you need to do is that the grinding wheel will come in here. You need to move this away from the grinding wheel, because if you don't move it away from the grinding wheel, and we'll show you how to do that once we get through this procedure, you can end up grinding the edges off and damaging the stop itself. So you don't want to do that. The next adjustment, and we'll just see whether you can, yeah, you can see that. This is for the tooth depth, how deep the grinding wheel will grind into the tooth. So you don't want to grind too deep and grind the tie straps away. You just want to grind in so that we're right on the bottom here. Don't grind where that tooth comes down, right to the very bottom. That's where you want to grind. Don't grind any lower than that. And so that's what that adjustment's for, and you've got the lock nut to set that. So that's what that does. I've also got a guide rail adjustment. We'll see if you can zoom in there, because you'll see this little bolt here, and they've got a nut there. So what that does, and we'll just take the chain off so that you can see that. There's a guide rail here, and what that will do will slightly close the gap up, and it will change the effect that the cam has. So if you tighten that up, it'll lock in this position. If you loosen it, you can turn it or push it in a different position. So it will lock in different positions. So if you're doing 3/8 low profile, I've got it set up for 3/8 low profile, so it locks in a nice position. So that's what that's for, and you just occasionally adjust that. Okay, we spoke, or we had a look before about the base knob. So that was, or the control knob. It's on the bottom. That was this knob here, the base knob, and that's to loosen the vise and to make it so that you can turn it for the top plate angle, or if you're going to do the tilt on the chainsaw. Oh, sorry, the chainsaw full chisel. If you're going to do tilt using full chisel, you'll loosen that right off so that it makes it easier to tilt it forwards and backwards. So that's the way that works. The next thing, let's have a look at the next thing here. That's probably all. Yeah, that's virtually all the controls that we can sort of go over. The next thing that is important, that when you do put or mount a wheel on here, you've got to be careful. If you do mount a wheel on there and you spin it and you find that it goes a little bit crooked, wheel wobble, what I personally do is make up these little gaskets out of cardboard. So I've got these little gaskets, and the reason that I do that is because the grinding wheel material, which is aluminium oxide, obviously is very hard and won't compress. So let's just say there's a few little bits of grit that are a little bit higher on one side than the other side, and then you clamp it up, and then you find out that when you spin the wheel, it's got a little bit of wheel wobble. If you put one of those little cardboard gaskets on either side, and you'll find out you can eliminate all that wobble pretty much. So that's a little trick there, just to remember that if your wheel is wobbling from side to side, a little bit of wheel wobble's okay, not much more than a fraction of a millimetre, because if you've got too much, it's going to only grind. Look, you want to be using the side of the wheel, at least 90% of the grinding wheel. You don't want the wheel so it's got a bit of a wobble and only 50% of the grinding wheel is grinding. Now, let's talk about these grinders. What sort of grinder do you want to buy? So let's just say, like me, that you started using a file and you got sick of using the file. Maybe you've got another chainsaw. Depends on how often you use a chainsaw. And you might say, no, I'd really like to go get a grinder. Well, there's the real El Cheapo ones, which are these models here, this type of grinder here. You can pick this up for about $60 or $70 at Jono & Jono in Ballarat, Victoria. It is almost identical copy to this one here, which is about 17 years old. This is going back quite a long time ago, from GMC, Global Machinery Company, made in China. So I brought, that was my first chainsaw grinder. The difference between the two is that the arbor is 23 millimeters on this, whereas this one is 22.2 millimeter arbors. The best part about that, it is very easy to get 4.7 millimeter grinding wheels, as well as a 3.2 millimeter. This is very, very hard because of the 23 mil arbor. Very difficult to get 4.7 millimeter wheels. I did source them, so I brought half a dozen. They do last a lot longer. The brown oxide wheels are fantastic. It's much finer, about 100 grit. So, as I said, this is the cheapest, so it depends whether you want. These are entry level. They work okay, but they're not perfect, but they do still give a good grind. So I won't criticize or say really bad things about them, because they will do the job, but obviously they don't do the job as good as something like this. So, okay, how much would you expect to pay for something like this? This you can get from Jono & Jono in Ballarat for approximately about $145. The motor that's on here is exactly the same as the Tacomec or Tecomec, whichever way you want to call it, because Tacomec and Tecomec are made in China. And all these type of grinders, which are a copy of a Oregon 511, all have this motor. So even on my Tacomec, exactly the same motor, right down to the little hole and grub screw that's in here. And they run quite warm, so you'll actually see them rebadged. One's called Timber Tough. That's a green type of machine that looks exactly the same as this. It's called Timber Tough, but it's just rebadged. There's another one called Dynamic Power Alloy Chainsaw Sharpener, exactly the same thing. There's another one, it starts with, I think, BAUG or something, some German type brand, but it's not really German. It's just rebadged, and it's made in China. So they're all coming out of the same factory, and they all use this same motor. Nothing wrong with the motor, really great, lots of power. The only other thing I would say is the light that comes with them is pathetic. It's only a normal filament type globe. I swapped this over to a 15 watt LED, and it is quite bright. So we'll just turn that on. And quite bright, so it really does the job. So that's probably one of the first things that I'll tell you about that you should get. So okay, let's have a look at some of the cons on this, the good, the things that aren't so good. Well, generally speaking, it's pretty good overall. Probably one of the worst things that's on this grinder is this little knob here. It is so loose, it's just a joke. It moves and comes undone during operation. A little bit of vibration, this thing will be all over the place. So, two ways to fix that. I got a bit of stainless steel like this, 3mm, and tapped a 6mm thread in it. Took this off, put this on, and used this as the main adjuster. Then just use this as the lock nut. And it works perfect, simple as that. Okay, let's just say that you don't have the tools to make that. The other thing that you can do, and it works quite well, is put a bit of thread tape on there. So just go get yourself a little bit of Teflon tape, wrap it around there a couple of times. You'll soon find out how that works, and that'll work really good. The second thing that I really didn't like about this, and I'll just take this off, this is a genuine Oregon type backstop. It works better than the one that it come with. And also, I brought the kit from Taconic. I think it was about $15 for this kit. So there it is, Taconic part number, for those that may be interested. You get the little tiny hairspring, so it's a very sensitive spring, which is much better than the original one. You get, I'll just get this out. So you get the better type backstop. The other one is a little bit too wide. So this is the one that's off a Taconic. And remember, Taconic make all the grinders for Oregon. They're just rebadged. And the reason I brought this kit is because of this plastic knob. It is slightly, it won't come, it's a little bit tight, just a little bit. But because it's a little bit tight, it certainly won't undo itself through vibration. So you can't buy the knob separate. You've got to buy it in this little kit. And as I said, that's the part number of it. So if you do wear out your backstop, or if you've got this knob on here and it vibrates loose and it's pissing you off, because that's what it did to me, I just made this. But this works better. You'll see this little red knob on all the Oregons, and what they do is make the thread slightly tighter in the injection molding when they make it, so it's got a little bit of tension on it, so it doesn't come unloose. So that's that part there. So that's probably the worst part. The grinding wheels, we'll talk about that. Remember I said it comes with 3 grinding wheels. They're not the most highest quality, doesn't matter If you buy the Tecamec, and they're going to cost you about 2.5 times as much as one of these. As I said, these are about $145 Australian. A Tecamec's about $365 to $400, depending where you buy it from. So these are a very cheap grinder, but they do work fantastic. We've spoken about the wheel wobble. The only other thing that I would say about these, and the Tecamec is a little bit better. The Tecamec doesn't use this type of printing on this aluminium plate. You'll find out it fades a lot, and even down the bottom here, you can find out that this fades in time. In 5 years' time, you've got to be careful. Don't wipe this with a rag, because if you keep wiping this with a rag, or you keep wiping the backstop with a rag, you'll end up rubbing the numbers off, the print, the ink, or whatever it is that they do it with. So that's a little problem there. So, yep, don't do that. Okay, so we've gone over the controls and all the good things and all the bad things. As far as I'm concerned, you're never going to get a chainsaw grinder for $145 that's going to work as good as this. As I said, that was really the only thing that I really wanted to do for $15, and that makes the grinder much, much better, and that doesn't come loose. So the next thing is how to use this. Now, I'll set it up and I'll show you how to set it up, but we're only going to take, in most cases, I'm only taking about 0.2 to 0.3 of a millimetre off the tooth. That's all it's required. If you start to try and take heavier grinds, you'll find out that you can overheat the tooth with any wheel and with any grinder, a bench grinder. So when you're grinding metal, any machine that grinds metal, it's got to do it nice and slow. And that means that when you pull this arm down, you've got to come down in a tapping motion, off, on, off, on. Do not bring this down and hold it like that, because immediately you're going to overheat the tooth. And we'll demonstrate that soon. So the settings that we're going to use are going to be stock standard. We're going to use 60 degrees on the top plate cutting angle, which is the actual angle of the grinding wheel we spoke before. So this angle is 60 degrees. It comes down at a 60-degree angle into the tooth. We're going to use 30 degrees, so we don't need tilt, so the vise is set level. And because we're going to do the right-hand tooth, we're going to set this at 30 degrees, lock this knob in the position. So now that this grinder has got two settings that's set up, we've set this at 60 degrees here, we've set this at 30 degrees on the left side. When we set it on the left is set up so that it grinds the right tooth. It's in reverse, just remember that. Now the next thing that we need to do is make sure that the grinding wheel and the backstop is all set properly. So we'll pull this back here, and hopefully you can see this. We'll zoom right in. What we need to do is make sure that that backstop on a right-handed tooth is pushed over, it's pushed over towards me, so most of it's over this side, so when the grinding wheel comes in here, that it does not grind off the plate. So that's what you've got to be careful of. We'll just see whether you can see this. You should be able to see this. Well, we'll get right down in there. Yeah, you can see that. It comes close to the stop. We'll just see whether you can see it from a different angle. If I do it on the other side, we'll see it better, so we may have a look at that. Maybe I'll do it that way. You'll see it better. So what we'll do a left-handed tooth, and we'll just set this. Now we're going to have to push this. To do a left-handed tooth, I'll zoom back out. To do a left-handed tooth, which is the tooth furthest away from you, we need to push this backstop right over, and we'll loosen this knob underneath again, You'll be able to see this better, so it's better that I demonstrate a left-hand tooth rather than a right-hand tooth, so we can really get in and see it. So we'll zoom in. We'll bring this down. And I think you can see there's a little tiny gap. I'll just need to move this over a little bit more. Okay, that's pretty good. When we bring this wheel, let's bring this down, this grinding wheel right down. There it is there. Now, you can see the gap that I've got here. So, if this backstop is too far, it can touch the wheel and you can grind it off. So, I've had to move this over almost the side of this is almost level with the side of the tooth. So this very edge on here is there. So what we need to do now is bring this down. That's set up correctly. Now if that was set up incorrect, you'll see the gap. You can see that gap there. The wheel doesn't touch. So as we turn that in, needs a bit more. Just touching now. So that's what you want. You just want that touching. Just make sure that that's sitting properly. Locking that in a position. That's locked in a position. Sorry, this backstop knob here, I've just tightened that up. So we'll go back to here. Okay, so that's just touching. That's how you set that up. Now we'll turn it on and grind. Now, the tapping motion is off, on, off, on. So we'll just turn that off. Now, I already preset this earlier before, so this is the depth. This is the adjustment for the depth of the, and as I said before, if you listened earlier, if you've got a brand new chain, it's quite easy. The grinding wheel comes down and just rests on the bottom there. So if you've got a new chain or fairly new, don't grind too deep. So that's just a matter now, because that's set up, you can grind all the left-hand teeth, all the same. Now, when you finish, you need to take the chain off and inspect it. And you need to check it, and we'll just see whether you can see this tooth. You need to inspect the tooth to make sure that it's ground properly. And you can see when I spoke about don't grind down too deep. That's okay. So that's just a matter now. If you want to do the right-hand teeth, it's just a matter of undoing. We'll just zoom back out. So if we want to do the other side, we would loosen this to the left, lock it in a position, adjust our backstop that comes right over towards us, bring the grinding wheel down and make sure, and we'll see if you can zoom in and see it, what we want to make sure that we're not going to grind the backstop off. You can see the clearance there. You can see the clearance in there. We could possibly give it a little bit more, so we'll just check. I'll just loosen that a little bit more. Put that in a position, lock it in. And as you can see, it's just touching. It's just touching there. So if we proceed to grind that, which we can, slight tapping motion off and on. And you can put your finger on that. It's cool as. That's how you know you're grinding properly, because it's nice and cool. So this is very important that you move this to the left and to the right when you're doing your teeth. It's not as critical if you've got a brand new chain. So I'll actually put, I think I've got a brand new section of chain. And if I was to put one on, yeah, I've got a section of chain here. You'll see that it's not as critical. We'll just pull this, unloosen this now. A brand new 3/8 tooth on a 3/8 chain would be approximately 10 millimeters in length. By the time you get to end of life, you're down about 3 millimeters. Now, if we zoom in there, you'll see the difference. Look at that difference. You've got more than 6 millimeters gap, 6 or 7 millimeters. So you can see that you can have this in the middle and you don't even need to adjust it when you've got a brand new chain. But I wanted to demonstrate to you that what happens when you get a worn chain, that if you don't adjust that, you'll end up grinding the edges off. So that virtually covers everything that I can think of, except if you're going to do the rakers or depth gauges. So if we're going to file the rakers, we use a raker tool, raker gauge tool. So what we would do, we'll take this chain off. Sorry, we don't need this chain. We'll put the chain, you can either put the chain back on the chainsaw and you could do it on the bar, but I've got a filing rig here. And it's just a matter for me to loosen these little clamps here, sit it in here. Because it's been all sharpened left and right, we need now to check the rakers. To check the rakers, you either use a gauge like this, which is not my most popular method of doing it, but nonetheless, they sell these. They're okay until the chain wears about halfway down, but it's not the type of gauge that I would promote. But nonetheless, that's the gauge that I do promote is called a progressive depth gauge, and this one's from Still also. It has a hard and soft setting, hard for hardwood, soft for softwood. It sits over each individual tooth, and you can run the file over the top because this is 62 Rockwell hardness, file's about 60. This type of gauge only sits over 4 teeth, so if the teeth are a different height, you can find out that this can be a little bit up this way or a little bit up that way and give you a little bit inaccurate results. You'll notice if you see that stamping on there, 0.065 of a millimeter, what this will actually do is only ever remove 0.65 of a millimeter off the raker below the highest point on the top of the tooth. And we'll just show you that. So the gap that we're talking about there, if that's the raker gauge sitting on top of the tooth, this gap under here is 0.65 of a millimeter. When the tooth wears down to here, because of this pivot point here causes a lot of problems with the rocking motion. So as the tooth goes through a bit of timber, it has this rocking motion because it strikes the tooth. The tooth goes backwards till it hits the raker. So the raker limits the amount of bite that the tooth can bite into the timber. So by the time you get down to the end of the life, right down to the back here on this corner, as you can see right there, your depth should be around 1.2 millimeters in depth. This gauge cannot remove 1.2 millimeters, which means that your cutting efficiency is going to drop off dramatically as you start to get down to the 2/3 of the life of the chain if you continue using this type of gauge. Do yourself a favour, go down to your local steel dealer. They're generally not hanging up on the wall. You've got to order them in FL1 to FL5. FL1 is for your 1/4 inch chain. FL2 is for your 3/8 low profile. FL3 is for your 0.325. FL4 is for your standard 3/8 chain. And FL5 is for your 404 chain. So they are chain specific because of the length of this little square. So these change in length because of the pitch. That's why they're chain specific, because when you get, say, a 404 chain, the pitch, the length of the rivets will be different length. So therefore this will sit in a different position. So if you try to use this on a smaller chain, you're going to get an incorrect setting. So if you mainly use, say, 3/8 chain, go out and buy one. I've got the whole 5. There's 5 in the set. I've got the whole 5. They are fantastic. You can get them in Husqvarna. Husqvarna aren't as hard as these. You can get them from West Coast Saws in America. They are not as hard also. The original inventor of the progressive depth gauge was Ray Carlton. He invented and put a worldwide patent on that particular gauge. Not that particular one, but this type of style with the square window and the little long legs. Looks like a little Lego man. Doesn't have arms. But that type of style was invented by Ray Carlton in the early 60s, put a worldwide patent on it, and Husqvarna have their version. As I say, it's much, even the Husky gauge is still better than this, but it's not unfortunately hardened. I do have a Husqvarna gauge. Husqvarna come in 2 different type of gauges. They have a combination roller guide, and we won't go into that, but this is a Husqvarna gauge. This is a roller guide where my fingers are. It sits over the chain so that you can hold your file or your round file at 30 degrees. So, and this is a hard and soft setting that sits over the same principle. It sits over the tooth and you proceed to file it. This is a little bit softer. So if you run the file over this, you're liable to wear this out much, much quicker. It won't stand up to the abuse that this can. If you look at this, I've been filing using this for about 2 years. And all it does is leave scratches over the top. So if anyone tells you that you can't file over the top, well, there's the proof. There it is. It'll just leave, as I said, 62 Rockwell, 60 Rockwell. File is softer, only by 2, but 2 makes a huge difference, and you'll have no problems using that. Look, it's been nearly 42 minutes explaining about how to use these grinders and a little bit on rakers. If you actually look on the channel, you'll find a lot more information. There's a review of the Tacoma. I've even got the Still USG. We did a little bit of review of these little El Cheapo grinders there. But if you're thinking of getting a grinder, you're talking about $70 for one of these, and you're talking about $140 for one of these. Do yourself a favor, put the extra $70, get yourself one of these. I will guarantee you'll be happy. So just to briefly recap to all those people out there watching, if you want to use standard settings without getting into anything complicated, this angle here, which is the grinder wheel angle, is set at 60 degrees. The technical name for this is top plate cutting angle, not to be confused with this one here, which is top plate angle. This is normally set at 30 degrees. The actual tilt of the table is left at 0 for semi-chisel. If you've got full chisel, I prefer, not everyone does, but I prefer to put 10 degrees downward tilt on it. If you do use full chisel is much more aggressive, but it does tend to go blunt much quicker, but it cuts a lot faster. That's the trade-off. And if you do go to the aggressive settings, which is 35 degrees, bear in mind, yes, it will cut quicker, but it will go blunt quicker. It's the same as on the angle there. If you go to 50 degrees, yes, it will cut quicker, but it will go blunt quicker. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. So that's why the recommended settings are 60 degrees, 30 degrees, no tilt. In that situation, you're going to cut 95% of the timber out there without any problem whatsoever. And that's the message that I'm trying to give to you, those settings. So I've gone over everything. I've showed you how to use the grinder. The most important part to me really is that if you ever do change these wheels, spin the wheel, because if you've got wheel wobble like that, your grinder's not going to grind very good. do yourself a favour, try and get a better grinding wheel for that. The ones that come with it are fairly cheap. If they're nice and straight, that's okay. Try and get a better brand. A better brand is, well, one of them is Kinnick. That's the brand that I've got on this little grinder. Kinnick is a Taiwanese company. You'll see the little yellow label on there. You can't actually read it, but that's a Kinnick wheel. The best wheels that you could possibly use are CBN wheels. CBN wheels are cost more than the grinder, so they typically use those in grinding shops. Steel dealers would probably use them. And if you've got tungsten carbide, they're going to use a diamond wheel as well, and they're very expensive. So these are called aluminium oxide, these pink wheels. All chainsaw grinders are sold with a pink wheel. There are higher quality and lesser quality pink wheels. You've got to do a little bit of research there, so just don't go out and buy the most cheapest wheel that's on the market. As I said, I still get good results from these, even out of the box. They're reasonable. As I said, if you do find that you've got a bit of wheel wobble, use those thin cardboard discs. Roughly, I'll just show you one. On this grinder, you've got you've got one that you push over the arbor, the aluminium arbor, which is 22 point. So that sits on one side, and that's got a little 6mm hole on it for this side. So this one sits that side, that one sits this side, and when you put that on either side of the wheel, because it can compress, and it's probably about 0.2 or 0.3 of a millimeter thick, that'll eliminate all your wheel wobble. Now, if you do actually use the cardboard on there, or you do spin it and you find that you've got a wheel wobble, the method is that you loosen the nut, you put the cardboard on, you just nip it up very tight, very lightly, spin the wheel. If you still see a bit of wheel wobble, loosen the nut, put the wheel in a different position, nip it up again. You may have to do that 5 or 6 times until you're really happy with till you eliminate all the wobble. You won't eliminate it 100%, but you may be able to eliminate 95% of it. When you've got it right, tighten it up. This is the reason why I don't like swapping wheels on the grinders. So that's why I've got quite a few grinders for all different saws or different chains. Plus I'm a bit of a collector too. So I've got the steel USG, which costs a lot more, about 10 times more than what this El Cheapo does. But nonetheless, it may be an El Cheapo grinder, but I would be giving this at least 8 out of 10, especially with this modification that I did just with this little wheel. So I'm very, very extremely happy. The Steel USG is probably the best grinder on the market, apart from some of the high quality Taconic made Oregon ones. So Taconic make them. Some are made in China. I'm not 100% sure. Some are made in Italy. But the really high-end ones are very, very good. And if you ask me, file versus grinder, if you use this grinder properly as a professional, you will outperform any person that files. And that's a pretty big claim to make. Most of the average Joe out there that uses a file is pretty ordinary. There are some people that use a file that are exceptional, but they are very few and far between. So I'm talking about the average Joe. So average Joe will file reasonable. If average Joe uses one of these, he will improve his performance. And that's the person I'm talking about, because there's some people that are gifted that can use a file. I'm only average when it comes to using a file on a chainsaw chain. And I can get it reasonably good and sharp, but not perfect, not as good as one of these will do. So I've got a Steel USG grinder, which will outperform this, but I'd still give this 8 out of 10. Anyway, look, thanks for watching. I hope people do enjoy some of the videos, especially the beginners, because that's what these videos are aimed at, the beginner that doesn't know. Thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Bye for now.